I won't be fasting on Tisha B'Av this year. That's because this year Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbat, and our national day of mourning is pushed off to Saturday night through Sunday. I, together with Jews all over the world, will be fasting instead on the 10th of Av. This year on the 9th, instead of fasting, we will be feasting, eating meat, drinking wine, enjoying the Shabbat, delighting in it, celebrating. Our sages teach that in a year like this, right up until the fast begins, one can have a feast fit for a king, like King Solomon during his reign. At first glance, this might seem inappropriate, and feel awkward or uncomfortable. After all, how can we be celebrating on the 9th, the saddest day of the Jewish calendar, the day on which we mourn the loss of both the first and second temples, the day on which we mourn the destruction of Jerusalem and commemorate calamities and tragedies that took place throughout Jewish history? It's been said on Yom Kippur, who has time to eat? And on Tisha B'Av, who wants to eat? But the truth is that this year we get a taste of what the Geula Shlema, the final redemption, will be like. When instead of fasting and mourning and sitting on the floor of a darkened synagogue, Tisha B'Av will be celebrated as a holiday in the rebuilt Holy Temple. Because while Tisha B'Av is described by the Talmud as a day of weeping and mourning for all generations, it's also described as the symbolic birthday of the Mashiach. It's a day which, over the course of Jewish history, saw so many tragic events. Yet it's called a Moed, an appointed time which can be understood to suggest a holiday. And indeed, one day it will be transformed into a festival. The prophet Zechariah promises that Tisha B'Av, together with all of our other days of mourning, will one day be a day of joy and gladness and a festival for the house of Judah. The 9th of Av is a bitter day, but it's also a day of hope. The Talmud relates that upon entering the Holy Temple, the Babylonians saw the cherubs on the Ark of the Covenant entangled in an embrace, expressing God's love for Israel despite the devastating destruction taking place all around. In another famous Talmudic account, the great sage Rabbi Akiva, together with a group of rabbis, witnesses a fox trespassing on the Temple Mount, traipsing over the site where the Holy of Holies stood, the place where the high priest could only enter once a year on Yom Kippur. The rabbis, the Talmud relates, begin to cry, but Rabbi Akiva begins to laugh. The rabbis ask Akiva, "Why are you laughing?" Rabbi Akiva asks, "Why are you weeping?" They explain that the verse says an individual who enters where he is not permitted to do is put to death. And now foxes trespass and traipse all over it. How can we not be crying? Rabbi Akiva says that's precisely why I am laughing. Because just as the prophecy that Zion will be plowed over like a field has come to fruition, so too the prophecy that elderly men and women will once again sit in the streets of Jerusalem and boys and girls will play in the streets will also be fulfilled. The rabbis respond with 4 powerful words: Akiva nichamtanu, Akiva nichamtanu. Akiva, you've consoled us. Akiva, you have consoled us. It's interesting, the verse that Rabbi Akiva chooses to cite is Zion will be plowed over like a field, from the 3rd chapter of the book of Micha. Why dafka this pasuk, this verse? Rabbi Akiva understood that right after plowing comes sowing. He could already see that the seeds of redemption had been planted deep. Rabbi Akiva understood that within the destruction, all around, the rebuilding and redemption had already begun. Tisha B'Av is a bitter day, but it's also a day of hope. And on a year like this, when instead of fasting, we are feasting on the 9th of Av, we experience just a little bit more of that hope. Our sages promise all who mourn for Jerusalem will merit to witness her in her joy. Let's mourn properly this year, so that next year we won't have to. And let's hope and pray that next year, on the 9th of Av, we will once again be feasting instead of fasting.